The house at number 12, Grimmauld Place, smelled of rot and resignation. Hermione Granger stood in the entrance hall, her wand lit, and tried not to breathe too deeply. The air itself seemed thick with generations of bitterness. Dust motes swirled in the weak afternoon light, filtering through grimy windows, and somewhere deeper in the house, something creaked with deliberate malice. Right then, Molly Weasley said briskly, her voice cutting through the oppressive silence. She stood in the center of the hall with her sleeves already rolled up, a determined set to her jaw. Hermione, you'll take the drawing room. Fred, George, second-floor bedrooms. And I don't want to hear about anything you've discovered unless it's actively cursed. Ron, you're with me in the kitchen. Ginny. I want to help, Hermione, Ginny interrupted. Molly's lips thinned, but she nodded. Fine, but stay together. And if you find anything that feels wrong, you fetch me immediately. Is that understood? They murmured agreement. Hermione noticed that even Fred and George, usually irrepressible, looked subdued. The house had that effect. It didn't welcome. It tolerated. Where's Professor Lupin? Hermione asked. He'll be along shortly. Molly's tone suggested the subject was closed. Now, we've got 3 days to make this place habitable for order meetings. Dumbledore wants it functional, not spotless, so focus on the main rooms. Leave the upper floors for now, except for checking they're safe. As the others dispersed, Hermione and Ginny climbed the stairs to the first floor. The steps groaned beneath their feet. Portraits along the walls had been covered with dust sheets, but Hermione could feel eyes watching from behind the fabric. One particularly large frame near the landing seemed to radiate hostility. That'll be Sirius's mum, Ginny whispered. Dad said she's got a permanent sticking charm. They can't get her down. Hermione filed that information away. A house where even the portraits were prisoners. The drawing room was vast and gloomy, dominated by a serpentine chandelier that looked distinctly unsafe. Hermione started with the basics. Scourgify for surfaces, careful Janchar for curses before moving anything. Ginny worked beside her, unusually quiet. They'd been at it for perhaps 20 minutes when Hermione noticed the cabinet. It stood against the far wall, half hidden behind a moth-eaten curtain. Unlike the other furniture, all heavy mahogany and cold elegance, this piece seemed smaller, more personal. The wood was lighter, the handles brass rather than silver. Someone had carved initials into the side, then tried to scratch them out. Should we check inside? Ginny asked. Hermione approached carefully, wand raised. She performed 3 separate detection charms before attempting the door. Nothing. No curses, no hexes, no protective enchantments at all. The cabinet opened with a soft click. Inside, jumbled together without order or care, were the remnants of a childhood. A wooden dragon, one wing broken. A set of tin soldiers, their paint flaking. A leather quaffle, deflated and cracked with age. A stack of photographs, edges burnt away so that faces disappeared into black char. And at the bottom, a child's drawing of a house. Not this house, but something smaller, with a garden and sun overhead, rendered in determined crayon strokes. Hermione's throat tightened. These are Sirius's, Ginny said softly. Yes. Hermione lifted the dragon carefully. Someone, a child, had tried to repair the wing with what looked like spello tape, but the fix had long since failed. He must have kept them hidden. His family wouldn't have approved of anything fun, Ginny finished. Anything normal. Hermione set the dragon down and reached for the photographs. Most had been deliberately burned, but a few remained partially intact. She could make out a young boy, perhaps 7 or 8, standing beside someone, taller, another child, a friend. The face was gone, consumed by careful flame. In another, the same boy sat on a broomstick, grinning fiercely. That face, too, had been burnt away. Why would he burn his own face? Ginny asked. I don't think he did. Hermione examined the scorch patterns. Look, the burning is too precise, too targeted. Someone else did this, someone who wanted to erase him from family history. A sound from the doorway made them both turn sharply. Creature stood there, barely 3 feet tall, his watery eyes fixed on the open cabinet. His bat-like ears trembled, and his already pronounced stoop seemed to deepen. Blood traitors, he muttered. Filthy blood traitors, touching Master Sirius's belongings, disturbing what ought to stay hidden. Oh, poor mistress, if she could see. We're cleaning, Hermione said, keeping her voice level. Mrs. Weasley sent us. The mudblood speaks. Creature's voice dripped venom. The mudblood thinks she has rights in the noble House of Black. Touching, prying, disturbing what's not hers. That's enough. Ginny stepped forward, wand raised. We're here on order business, and you'll show respect, or… Ginny, don't. Hermione put a hand on her friend's arm. She looked at Creature, really looked. Beneath the hostility, she saw something else. Fear, pain. The house elf's gnarled hands were trembling. Creature, she said quietly, these things belonged to Sirius when he was a child. They're just toys, just memories. Should stay hidden, Creature hissed. Should stay forgotten. Master Sirius wanted them forgotten. He left them behind, left everything behind, left Creature. His voice broke, and for a moment the hatred cracked to reveal something raw underneath. Then he was gone, disappearing with a pop that echoed in the silent room. Hermione turned back to the cabinet, her mind working. Creature's reaction had been extreme, even for him. These weren't just toys. They meant something. They represented something. Evidence, she thought. These are evidence. What do we do with them? Ginny asked. Should we tell Mum? Hermione hesitated. That was the question, wasn't it? Molly would want them catalogued quickly, added to the list of items to be stored or discarded, dealt with efficiently so they could move on to the next task. The Order needed this headquarters functional within days. They didn't have time for emotional archaeology. But these objects told a story. The hidden cabinet, the burnt photographs, the careful preservation of a childhood that someone, Sirius himself or his family, had wanted erased. Understanding that story might matter, might help them understand the man who'd lived it, might help them understand why Sirius had fled this place and never wanted to return. Hermione remembered his face in the shrieking shack, the way he'd looked at Peter Pettigrew with such desperate rage. She remembered his hollow laughter, his quick shifts between warmth and bitterness. Man shaped by this house, these people, this history of erasure and control. Hermione, Ginny prompted. We should… Hermione stopped. What should they do? The practical choice was obvious. Tell Molly, pack the items quickly, move on. They had work to do, real work, work that mattered to the war effort. But the photograph in her hand, this scorched evidence of someone trying to burn away a child's existence, felt important in a way she couldn't fully articulate. Not important to the Order's tactical needs, important to understanding, to bearing witness. She thought of how Harry spoke about Sirius, the fierce loyalty, the determination to see him as innocent, as good. But Harry didn't really know him. None of them did. This house held answers to questions Harry didn't even know to ask. Questions like, what did they do to you here? What made you the way you are? How much of your recklessness is courage? And how much is the survival instinct of a boy who learned young that nothing good would last? We'll document everything, Hermione said finally. Carefully. I'll take notes on what we find, where, what condition, any context. Then we'll report to Mrs. Weasley, but with enough information that she can make a proper decision about what to do with them. That'll take ages, Ginny pointed out. Mum wants the drawing room finished today. I know. Hermione pulled out a spare bit of parchment and a self-inking quill from her beaded bag. But these aren't just belongings. They're pieces of Sirius's history. Someone should at least acknowledge they exist before we box them up or throw them away. Ginny looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll keep cleaning. You document. For the next hour, Hermione worked methodically. She sketched the cabinet's location, noted each item, described its condition. The dragon with the broken wing, attempt at magical repair, unsuccessful. The tin soldiers, carefully arranged by house and age, suggesting they'd been collected over years. The quaffle, professional quality, probably expensive, definitely not approved by parents who viewed Quidditch as common. The photographs were hardest. She forced herself to look at each one, to note what remained visible and what had been destroyed. A pattern emerged. Any image where young Sirius smiled too widely, stood too proudly, looked too much like himself. Those were the ones most thoroughly burned. She was examining the crayon drawing when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Remus Lupin appeared in the doorway, looking tired. His robes were shabby even by his standards, and new lines had appeared around his eyes since she'd last seen him. But he smiled when he saw them. Hermione, Ginny, how's the cleaning going? Slowly, Ginny said, casting a meaningful glance at Hermione's notes. Lupin crossed the room, and his gaze fell on the open cabinet. His expression shifted, surprise, then something deeper, sadness perhaps, or recognition. I didn't know these were still here, he said quietly. He picked up the wooden dragon, turned it over in his scarred hands. James gave him this. 5th year, I think. Sirius mentioned that his family considered dragons common creatures, suitable only for breeding or sport, never as friends. So James found the most common, most cheerful-looking dragon toy he could, and left it on Sirius's bed with a note saying, "For your common sensibilities." Hermione watched him cradle the broken toy. His family burned most of the photographs. They burned him off the family tree as well. Lupin set the dragon down carefully. When he was 16, his mother did it herself apparently, blasted his face right off the tapestry. He looked at Hermione. What are you doing with all this? Documenting it. Hermione met his gaze steadily. Before we decide what to do with it, I thought someone should know these things existed, should understand what they did to him. Here, Lupin finished. He was quiet for a moment. That's thoughtful of you, and probably painful. Is it wrong, Hermione asked, to look through his things like this? He's not here to give permission. I don't know, Lupin admitted. Sirius left this place the day he was 17 and never looked back. He might have wanted these things left forgotten. Then again, he touched the crayon drawing. He hid them. He could have destroyed them himself, but he didn't. Maybe some part of him wanted them preserved, wanted someone, someday, to know he'd existed before all this darkness. Footsteps in the hallway announced Molly's arrival. She entered with her usual brisk energy, then stopped short when she saw them gathered around the cabinet. "What's this then?" "Sirius's childhood belongings," Hermione explained. "We found them in that cabinet. I was just making notes." "Notes?" Molly frowned. "Hermione, dear, we're meant to be cleaning, not conducting research." "I know, but these seemed important. They're toys." Molly's voice was kind but firm. "Old toys from a difficult childhood. The kindest thing we can do is pack them away properly and let Sirius decide what to do with them when he's ready. If he's ever ready." She glanced at Lupin. "Remus, surely you agree. Dumbledore wants this house functional by Friday." Lupin looked between Molly and Hermione, clearly torn. "Perhaps there's value in understanding." "Understanding is all well and good," Molly interrupted, "but we haven't got time for it. There are 3 floors still to clear, curses to check, and a kitchen full of doxies. I'm sorry, Hermione, but we need to keep moving." Hermione felt the notes in her hand, looked down at the evidence she'd been gathering. Molly was right, of course. They had work to do, practical, necessary work. But the burnt photographs seemed to plead silently. "Acknowledge us. Remember we existed. Don't let us disappear." "I'll be quick," Hermione said quietly. "Just let me finish the documentation. Then we'll pack everything properly, and I promise I'll move on to the next task." Molly opened her mouth, likely to argue, then sighed. "Half an hour, that's all, Hermione. Then this room needs to be finished." She left, and Hermione heard her voice echo down the hallway, chivying Ron and the twins. Lupin remained. He watched Hermione return to her careful notes, and something like approval crossed his face. "Thank you," he said simply, "for caring enough to look." Hermione didn't answer. She was writing again, her hand moving steadily across the parchment, recording what remained of a lost boy's broken things. Outside, the summer afternoon faded toward evening. In the shadows, Creature watched from a hidden alcove, his ancient eyes gleaming with something that might have been resentment or might have been grief. The house settled around them, holding its secrets close. Molly Weasley had cleaned a great many things in her life. She'd scrubbed cauldrons, encrusted with failed potions, wrestled gnomes from garden beds, vanished stains whose origins she preferred not to contemplate. She'd cleaned the burrow top to bottom more times than she could count, and she'd done it all with the particular efficiency of a woman who understood that a clean home was the foundation upon which everything else was built. But Grimmauld Place resisted her in ways the burrow never had. It wasn't just the dirt, though there was plenty of that, decades of it, layered thick as history. It wasn't even the curses, though she'd already discovered 3 objects that had tried to bite, hex, or strangle whoever touched them. No, what made this house so difficult was that it didn't want to be cleaned. Every room seemed to clutch its shadows closer when she entered, every surface to hide rather than reveal. The house wanted to keep its secrets, and Hermione, it seemed, wanted to excavate them. Molly paused outside the drawing room on the second morning, her arms full of fresh cleaning supplies. and listened to the voices within. Clearly a disciplinary implement, Hermione was saying. Look at the staining on the leather, and these marks here, on the wall. They correspond to the height of a child around 9 or 10 years old. You think they beat him? That was Ginny, her voice tight with anger. I think someone in this house believed in corporal punishment, yes, and given where we found this, hidden in what appears to be Sirius's childhood bedroom. Molly pushed the door open, perhaps more forcefully than necessary. Both girls looked up, startled. They were kneeling on the floor beside an overturned trunk, surrounded by objects that Molly recognized with a sinking heart. More of Sirius's things. More evidence of his miserable childhood. Hermione had parchment spread before her, covered in neat handwriting and small sketches. Still documenting? Molly asked, hearing the edge in her own voice. Hermione had the grace to look embarrassed. Mrs. Weasley, I know you said to move on, but we found this trunk under the floorboards, and you decided that your research was more important than the work we came here to do. Molly set down her supplies with a decisive thunk. Hermione, dear, I gave you half an hour yesterday. That was meant to be the end of it. But we're finding things that matter, Ginny started. We're finding painful reminders of a painful past, Molly interrupted, which we are then dwelling on instead of making this house safe and functional for the Order. Do you understand what's at stake here? Dumbledore needs a headquarters. The Order needs a secure location to meet. What we do not need is a museum dedicated to Sirius Black's traumatic childhood. Hermione stood, clutching her notes. With respect, Mrs. Weasley, I think understanding what happened to Sirius in this house might help us understand him better. Help Harry understand him better. Harry doesn't need to know every terrible thing that happened to his godfather. Molly felt her voice rising and forced it back down. Sometimes, Hermione, the kindest thing we can do is leave the past buried. Some stones are better left unturned. Even if they're still hurting him? Hermione challenged. Even if he's carrying all of this without anyone understanding why, especially then. Molly surprised herself with her own vehemence. Both girls stared at her. She took a breath, chose her words more carefully. Sirius has suffered enough. The last thing he needs is people digging through his childhood traumas without his permission, making him relive every cruel thing his family did to him. Can't you see that this? She gestured at the scattered objects, the careful notes. Is a violation? It's bearing witness, Hermione said quietly. There's a difference. Is there? Molly challenged. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're satisfying your own curiosity at the expense of someone's privacy. Hermione flinched as though she'd been slapped. Ginny moved closer to her friend, protective. Mum, that's not fair. Fair or not, it's true. Molly softened her tone slightly. Hermione, I know your heart's in the right place. I know you want to help. But the way to help Sirius is not by cataloguing every injury he suffered. It's by making this house clean and safe so he has one less thing to worry about. So he can use it without being constantly reminded of what it used to be. You can't clean away history, Hermione said. No, Molly agreed, but you can choose not to dwell in it. She knelt beside the trunk, began methodically placing objects back inside. These things should be packed away properly, stored somewhere Sirius can access them if he chooses, but not left scattered about as though his pain is an exhibit for examination. What if we're meant to find them? Ginny asked suddenly. What if there's something here that matters? Something Sirius needs us to know? Then he'll tell us himself when he's ready. Molly closed the trunk with a firm snap. Until then, we respect his privacy and do the work we came here to do. Is that understood? Hermione looked at her for a long moment, then bent to gather her notes. Understood. But something in her tone suggested it wasn't. Not really. The day progressed in tense silence. Molly set Hermione and Ginny to work on the second-floor bedrooms, well away from any trunks or cabinets that might contain archaeological interest. She herself tackled the ground floor, working with sharp, angry efficiency that left furniture gleaming and floors spotless, but did nothing to ease the tight knot in her chest. She wasn't a cruel woman. She knew that. She'd spent her life caring for her children, for her husband, for anyone who needed help. But she also knew, from hard experience, that some wounds healed best when left alone. That sometimes the kindest thing you could do was provide normality, routine, cleanliness, not excavation. Arthur had nightmares sometimes about the war, about colleagues who hadn't survived. She'd learned, over the years, that he didn't want to talk about them, didn't want analysis or sympathy. He wanted breakfast cooked normally, wanted their children laughing at the table, wanted life to continue as though the darkness didn't exist. That was how he coped. That was his healing. Perhaps Sirius was the same. She was in the entrance hall, wrestling with a particularly stubborn suit of armor when Remus Lupin arrived. Molly. He looked around at the transformation. Dust cleared, floors visible, the worst of the grime banished. You've made remarkable progress. We're here to work, not to sightsee. She vanished the rust from the armor's joints with perhaps more force than necessary. Remus raised an eyebrow. Is something wrong? Nothing that discipline won't solve. She straightened, wiped her hands on her apron. Remus, I need you to speak with Hermione. She's become distracted by Sirius's childhood belongings. I've told her to focus on the cleaning, but she seems to think documenting every painful object in this house is somehow more important than the actual work. Remus's expression shifted to something careful. I see. Do you? Molly challenged. Because I'm not sure she does. This isn't research, Remus. This is someone's private pain, and we have no right to go pawing through it just because we're curious. Is that what you think she's doing? Satisfying curiosity? I think she's a bright girl who sees a mystery and wants to solve it. Molly's voice was firm. But Sirius Black is not a mystery to be solved. He's a man who suffered enough without us adding to it. Remus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. Molly, may I show you something? He led her up the stairs to the first-floor landing, where a large covered portrait dominated the wall. Molly had noticed it before, but had been too busy to investigate. Now Remus pulled the dust sheet away, revealing an ornate golden frame. Inside the frame was a tapestry, though calling it that felt too gentle. It was a family tree, rendered in golden thread on black fabric, showing generations of blacks stretching back centuries. Names blazed in elaborate script, connected by delicate lines of ancestry. But one name had been destroyed. There, on a lower branch, was a scorch mark where fire had consumed the fabric. The threads around it were blackened, melted. Above and below, Molly could read Orion Black and Walburga Black, and beside the burn, Regulus Black. Where Sirius's name should have been, there was only ash. His mother did this, Remus said quietly. When he was 16, she literally burned him out of the family history, as though he'd never existed. Molly stared at the destroyed threads, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. And this, Remus continued, pointing to other scorch marks scattered across the tapestry, is Andromeda, burned away for marrying a Muggle-born. Here's Alfred, disowned for leaving Sirius money. Here's Cedrella, burned away for marrying a Weasley, your husband's grandfather, I believe. I know the story, Molly said softly. Then you know this isn't ancient history. This is what Sirius lived with. This is the family that raised him, a family so dedicated to blood purity that they literally erased anyone who disagreed with them, who tried to erase him. Remus covered the tapestry again, but gently, as though even the destroyed version deserved care. Hermione isn't documenting out of curiosity, Molly. She's documenting out of compassion. Because someone should acknowledge what happened here. Someone should say, this was wrong, this was cruel, and Sirius survived it anyway. Molly felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them away furiously. But what good does it do? How does knowing every detail of his suffering help him now? I don't know that it does help him, Remus admitted. But I think it might help us. Help Harry. Help anyone who tries to understand why Sirius is the way he is, reckless and loyal and terrified of confinement and desperate to prove himself. He's carrying all of this. He gestured at the covered tapestry, whether we acknowledge it or not. The question is whether we look away because it's easier or whether we bear witness because it's right. It feels like a violation, Molly said. It might be, Remus agreed, but so was what they did to him, and at least our violation comes from care. They stood in silence for a moment, the covered tapestry looming beside them like a monument to casual cruelty. Finally, Molly spoke. I'm trying to protect him. That's all I'm doing. I know. Remus's voice was kind. But sometimes protection looks like control. And sometimes the best thing we can do for someone is trust them to decide what they can handle, even if that means trusting others to handle it on their behalf. You're saying I should let Hermione continue. I'm saying that shutting down every attempt to understand Sirius's past might do more harm than good, even if that understanding is painful. He paused. She's being careful, Molly, respectful. She's not gossiping or treating it lightly. She's simply acknowledging. Molly thought of Hermione's careful notes, her gentle handling of the broken dragon, thought of Ginny's anger at the evidence of abuse. They weren't being cruel. They were being witness to cruelty, which was different, but it still felt wrong. What if he doesn't want us to know? She asked quietly. Then we keep it to ourselves, Remus said simply. But we'll know, and knowing might help us help him when he needs it, if he needs it. Molly closed her eyes. She thought of her own children, of the secrets they kept from her, of the pain she couldn't always protect them from. She thought of Fred and George, who joked through everything because humor was their armor. She thought of Percy, who hid his hurt behind rules and correctness. She thought of Ron, who concealed his insecurities with loyalty and stubbornness. She couldn't fix any of them by pretending their pain didn't exist. Perhaps she couldn't fix Sirius that way either. All right, she said finally. Hermione can explore, carefully, quietly. But Remus, you'll supervise. And if anything she finds seems too private, Too painful. We stop. We pack it away. Agreed? Agreed. He smiled slightly. Though I suspect most of what we find will be too painful by definition, this was not a happy house. No, Molly said, looking at the covered tapestry. It wasn't. She found Hermione and Ginny in the second-floor bedroom, dutifully cleaning woodwork. Both looked up warily when she entered. Hermione, Molly said, her voice gentler than before. I owe you an apology. I was harsh earlier, and not entirely fair. Hermione blinked in surprise. Mrs. Weasley, let me finish. Molly sat on the edge of a dusty bed. I still think we need to be very careful. This is Sirius's private history, and we're intruding on it without his permission. But Remus helped me understand that perhaps some intrusions come from care rather than curiosity, and I believe yours does. It does, Hermione said quietly. So here's what we'll do. You may continue documenting what you find, but only with Remus present to provide context and guidance. Nothing you discover goes beyond this house or the people currently in it. We keep Sirius's privacy as much as we can while still acknowledging what happened here. Does that seem reasonable? Very reasonable. Hermione smiled, tentative. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Molly stood, brushed dust from her robes. This is still a working operation. The Order needs this headquarters functional, so you'll balance your archaeological interests with actual cleaning, and you'll check with me before going into any new areas. Understood? Understood. Good. Molly moved toward the door, then paused. Hermione, what you said before about bearing witness, that was well put. Just remember that bearing witness carries responsibility. What we learn here, we may need to carry for the rest of our lives. Make sure you're ready for that weight. Hermione met her gaze steadily. I am. Molly wasn't sure she believed it, wasn't sure anyone could be ready for that particular burden, but she nodded anyway. Sometimes you didn't get to be ready. Sometimes you simply had to do what needed doing and hope you were strong enough to bear the consequence. As she descended the stairs, she heard Hermione and Ginny's voices resume behind her, quieter now, more thoughtful. Remus had gone to find them, to begin supervising their careful excavation of pain, and Molly returned to her cleaning, to the simple, honest work of making one room after another safe and functional. But the burnt tapestry lingered in her mind. All those erased names, all that casual erasure, and she wondered if perhaps Hermione was right. Perhaps some things needed to be remembered, even when remembering hurt. Especially then. Remus Lupin had always been good at waiting. It was a skill learned young, refined through necessity. Waiting for the moon to wane. Waiting for employers to overlook his condition. Waiting for friends to decide whether his lycanthropy mattered more than his loyalty. He'd spent most of his life in various states of patient observation, watching for the moment when it was safe to move forward. But Grimmauld Place tested even his patience. The house revealed itself slowly, grudgingly, like a witness under interrogation who gave up information only when cornered. Each room held layers of history, not just the obvious dark artifacts and cursed objects, but smaller evidences of the people who'd lived here. A child's handprint on a dusty windowsill, scratches on a door frame marking height over years, a hidden cache of Muggle coins, probably contraband, stuffed behind loose wallpaper. And Creature, watching everything, growing more agitated by the hour. Remus had encountered the house elf several times over the past 2 days. Each meeting followed the same pattern. Creature would appear suddenly, mutter insults under his breath, half-breed, blood traitor, filth in the noble house, then disappear before anyone could respond. The elf's hatred was ancient and reflexive, trained into him over decades of service to the black family. But beneath the hatred, Remus sensed something else: fear. It was the afternoon of their 3rd day at Grimmauld Place. Hermione had discovered what appeared to be a schoolroom on the 2nd floor, a small chamber with a child-sized desk, shelves of books on magical theory and pure-blood history, and a blackboard still bearing faint traces of handwriting exercises. The script was careful, controlled, clearly produced under supervision. They schooled him at home before Hogwarts, Hermione said, running her finger along the spines of the books. Look at these titles: Noble Heritage, A History of Blood Purity, Proper Conduct for Young Wizards of Breeding, The Sacred 28 Families. Standard black family education, Remus confirmed. He opened one book at random, found a child's notes in the margin. This is rubbish, someone had written in defiant scrawl. Probably age 10 or 11, judging by the handwriting. James says Muggles invented aeroplanes, and that's more impressive than anything in this book. Despite everything, Remus smiled. Even then, Sirius had been resisting. "What's this?" Ginny called from the corner. She'd been examining what looked like a cupboard, but when opened, it revealed something else entirely. A narrow space, barely large enough for a child to stand in, with scratch marks on the inside of the door. Remus felt something cold settle in his chest. "A punishment cupboard," he said quietly. Hermione turned, her face pale. They locked him in there. So it would seem. Remus examined the scratches more closely. Some were shallow, probably made with fingernails. Others looked deeper, as though something sharp had been used, perhaps a ring or a button, anything to mark the passage of time in the dark. He thought of young Sirius, proud and defiant, even at 7 or 8, being shut away for hours as punishment for some infraction against the family's rigid standards. "How long?" Ginny asked, her voice tight with anger. "I don't know. Long enough to leave marks." Remus closed the cupboard door gently, as though the child inside might still be there, still counting scratches. Pure-blood families of that era believed in strict discipline. The blacks more than most. "This isn't discipline," Hermione said. "This is cruelty." "Yes," Remus agreed. "It is." A sound from the doorway made them all turn. Creature stood there, his bat-like ears pressed flat against his skull, his rheumy eyes fixed on the open cupboard. His entire body was trembling. "You should not be here," he hissed. "Should not be touching, prying, disturbing. This room is Master Sirius's room. Should stay closed." "We're cleaning, creature," Hermione said gently. "Just cleaning." "Lies." The elf's voice rose to a shriek. "The mudblood lies. She's not cleaning. She's looking. She's searching." He clutched at his tea towel garment, pulled at his ears in distress. Too much searching. Too much finding. Some things should stay hidden, should stay forgotten, Mistress said. Mistress always said. "Creature." Remus kept his voice calm, non-threatening. "What did your mistress say should stay hidden?" The elf's eyes went wide, terrified. Then he vanished with a crack that echoed in the small room. Remus exchanged glances with Hermione. "He's not just angry. He's frightened. Of what we'll find? Ginny asked. Or of what he's been commanded to protect? Remus thought back over Creature's behavior, the specific nature of his agitation, the way it increased whenever they found something particularly personal. House elves can be given orders that bind them even after their master's death. While Burger Black was obsessive about family secrets, if she commanded Creature to protect certain things, he'd have no choice but to obey, even if it distresses him. So there's something else here, Hermione said slowly. Something he's been ordered to hide. Perhaps. Remus moved to the window, looked out at the grimy square below. Or perhaps he simply believes we're violating sacred space. To Creature, Sirius is both traitor and master. He probably doesn't know how to reconcile those identities. Watching us dig through Sirius's childhood might be unbearable for him. Should we stop? Ginny asked. Hermione shook her head. We can't. Not now. If there's something here that explains what happened to Sirius, something that might help us understand him better, we have a responsibility to find it. Do we? Remus challenged gently. Or do we have a responsibility to respect his privacy, even if that means remaining ignorant? It was the question he'd been avoiding for 3 days, the tension between knowledge and consent, between understanding and intrusion. Every object they found, every evidence of abuse or neglect, deepened their comprehension of Sirius. But at what cost? What right did they have to excavate trauma without permission? He can't give us permission, Hermione pointed out. He's in hiding, and by the time he returns, if he returns, it might be too late. Harry might need this context. We might need it. Need it for what? Remus asked. To help him. Hermione's voice was passionate now. To understand why he does what he does. Why he's so reckless, so desperate to prove himself, so... She stopped, swallowed. My parents are dentists, Professor. Muggles. I've read about psychology, about childhood trauma. What we're finding here, the isolation, the physical punishment, the emotional erasure, these things shape people. They leave scars that don't show. If we understand those scars, we can help Harry understand his godfather. We can help Sirius himself, maybe. And if Sirius doesn't want to be understood, Remus asked quietly, if he spent his entire adult life building walls around this part of his past, and we're tearing them down without asking. Hermione had no answer for that. They worked in silence for the next hour, finishing the schoolroom and moving to an adjacent bedroom, probably a guest room, judging by its impersonal furnishing. But even here they found evidences of Sirius's presence. More books hidden under the bed, these ones adventure stories and tales of Muggle exploration, clearly contraband. A stack of letters, mostly from James Potter, describing life at Hogwarts before Sirius joined him, full of casual affection and excited plans. Can't wait till you're here, one letter read. It's brilliant, Sirius. Nothing like they tell you at home. No one cares who your family is or how pure your blood. They just care if you're good at Quidditch and whether you can take a joke. Remus remembered receiving similar letters from James, enthusiastic, inclusive, utterly unconcerned with blood status or dark family histories. James had been their anchor, the one who made broken people feel whole, simply by assuming they already were. He was still reading when Molly appeared in the doorway. Remus, could I speak with you? In private. He followed her down to the entrance hall. She looked troubled. I've been in the kitchen, she said without preamble. Creature was there. I don't know how to describe it. He was grieving, pulling at his ears, muttering about failing his mistress, about secrets exposed, about blood traitors dishonoring the noble house. I tried to calm him, but he just screamed at me and disappeared. He's under tremendous strain, Remus said. House elves aren't meant to have divided loyalties. Sirius is his master now, but his entire identity was built around serving the Black family values. Values Sirius rejected. And now we're here, going through the family's private history. Do you think he'd hurt someone? Molly asked bluntly. To protect whatever secret he's guarding? Remus considered. House elves have powerful magic, but they're also bound by their nature. Creature can't directly harm his master or his master's guests, but he could hide things from us, move objects, lock doors, make our work much more difficult. Or he could tell someone. Molly's voice was low, urgent. Remus, what if he reports to the wrong people? He served this family for decades. He probably knows Death Eaters, knows how to contact them. He's bound to Sirius, Remus reminded her. He can't betray the Order's location or activities. Can't he? Molly challenged. You just said house elf magic is powerful and loyalty is complicated. What if there's some loophole we haven't considered? Remus hadn't thought of that. It was unlike him. He was usually the one anticipating dangers, preparing for complications. But he'd been so focused on the ethical questions, on whether they had the right to excavate Sirius's past, that he'd overlooked the more immediate tactical concern. Creature was a security risk. We should tell Dumbledore, Molly said. And what would we tell him? That Creature is upset because we're cleaning? That he's hiding something, but we don't know what? Remus shook his head. Without more information, we're just speculating. Then get more information. Molly's jaw was set. Talk to Creature. Use legilimency if you must. Find out what he's hiding before it becomes a problem. I can't use legilimency on a house elf without cause, Remus said sharply. That would be a profound violation. And what we're doing to Sirius's privacy isn't, Molly shot back. The words hung between them, sharp and true. Remus looked away first. That's different. Is it? Molly asked. Because from where I'm standing, we seem very selective about which violations we're willing to commit. We'll dig through Sirius's childhood trauma without his permission, but we won't question his house elf because that feels too invasive. We'll document every painful memory in this house, but we won't take the necessary steps to ensure those memories don't endanger the Order. You're right, Remus admitted quietly. I've been inconsistent, hypocritical even. So what do we do? Remus thought. The options were limited and unsatisfying. They could interrogate Creature using authority or magic to compel answers. But that would likely drive the elf to more desperate measures. They could stop the excavation entirely, pack everything away, pretend they'd never looked. But Hermione was right that understanding Sirius's past might prove important, and they'd already crossed too many lines to turn back now. They could inform Dumbledore and let him decide, but that felt like abdicating responsibility. Or they could wait, watch, let Creature reveal himself in his own time. We continue carefully, Remus said finally. We don't force information from Creature, but we pay attention to his reactions. We note what makes him most distressed, what he guards most fiercely, and we prepare for the possibility that he's protecting something significant, something that might change how we understand this family, this house, or Sirius himself. That's not much of a plan, Molly observed. No, Remus agreed, but it's the only one that doesn't require us to become the kind of people who torture house elves for information, or abandon our friends to their unexamined trauma, or stop asking difficult questions just because the answers are uncomfortable. Molly studied him for a long moment. You're more conflicted about this than you're admitting. I'm conflicted about everything, Remus said honestly. I've spent my entire life navigating impossible choices. This is just another one. He returned, upstairs to find Hermione photographing the letters from James, preserving them before returning them to their hiding place. She worked with such careful reverence, gloves on, fingers gentle, expression serious. She understood what she held, the weight of it. Creatures becoming a problem, he told her. Molly's concerned he might be hiding something important, something we need to know. Hermione looked up. What do you think? I think house elves reflect the families they serve, and the Blacks kept many secrets. He paused. I also think that forcing those secrets from Creature would make us no better than the people who hurt Sirius in the first place. So we wait, we observe, we listen, and if Creature chooses to tell us something, or if he makes a mistake that reveals it, then we'll decide what to do with that knowledge. Remus smiled slightly. Patience, Hermione. It's not glamorous, but it's often effective. And if we run out of time, if the Order needs this house before we find what Creature's hiding, then we'll have done our best with the information we had. Remus began helping her organize the letters. That's all anyone can do. Make choices with incomplete knowledge and hope they're right, or at least hope they're not catastrophically wrong. Outside the window, evening was falling. The square below darkened, street lamps flickering to uncertain life. And somewhere in the house, Creature watched from shadows, guarding his terrible secrets, bound by commands from the dead, torn between masters living and gone. The house settled around them with a sound like distant weeping. Some questions, Remus thought, answered themselves in time. He hoped they'd be ready when this one did. Hermione Granger had always believed in the power of primary sources. Her parents had raised her to value evidence, documentation, the careful preservation of fact. Her father kept meticulous records of every patient he'd ever treated. Her mother organized their family photographs by date and event, annotating the backs with names and context so that nothing would be forgotten. They taught her, without ever saying it directly, that memory was fragile and precious, that what wasn't recorded might be lost forever. So when she found the letter tucked inside a copy of Advanced Transfiguration Theory on Sirius's childhood bookshelf, her first instinct was to preserve it. Her second instinct was to read it. The book itself was innocuous, a standard Hogwarts text, probably assigned reading before Sirius's first year. But someone had hollowed out the center pages, creating a small cavity. Inside lay a single piece of parchment, folded many times, the creases worn soft from repeated handling. Hermione unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, as though the writer had been pressed for time or composure. The date at the top read, June 1971, just before Sirius would have started at Hogwarts. My dearest Sirius, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Mother has made it clear that my marriage to Ted means I'm no longer welcome in this house, no longer part of this family. She'll burn my name from the tapestry, just as she threatens to burn yours if you continue disappointing them. I'm writing because I need you to know something. You are not alone in feeling wrong here, in feeling like you don't belong, like you're broken or traitorous simply for wanting kindness instead of cruelty, love instead of power. I felt it too. I still feel it. Even now, even as I prepare to leave. They'll tell you I've betrayed our blood, that I've chosen a mudblood over family honor. They'll use me as an example of what happens to those who abandon tradition. Don't believe them, Sirius. I didn't abandon anything worth keeping. You're about to go to Hogwarts. You'll meet people there who don't care about blood purity or family trees, who'll judge you by your character instead of your surname. Let them. Let yourself become who you actually are, not who mother and father demand you be. It won't be easy. They'll write letters full of disappointment and threat. They'll manipulate and punish and try to reshape you into their image. But you're stronger than you know. I've watched you resist them even as a child. The way you defend the house elves, the way you ask questions they can't answer, the way you look at muggle things with curiosity instead of contempt. Stay strong, little cousin. Remember that love matters more than blood, that kindness is not weakness, that choosing your own path is not betrayal, no matter what they tell you. You have family who'll support you if you need it. Ted and I will always be here. Write if you can. Visit when you're able. You're welcome in our home always, no matter what Mother says. With all my love, Andromeda P.S. Burn this after reading. If they find it, they'll only use it against us both. Hermione read the letter 3 times, her throat tight with emotion. This wasn't just a piece of family history. This was a lifeline, extended from one drowning person to another. Andromeda had known what Sirius was facing, had tried to prepare him, had offered him escape. Had he read it? The worn creases suggested yes. Had he followed her advice? Partially at least. He'd gone to Hogwarts and found James, found the Marauders, found a different kind of family. But he'd never burned the letter. He'd kept it, hidden, preserved against all instructions. Why? What have you got there? Ginny asked from across the room. Hermione hesitated. The letter felt intensely private, more intimate somehow than the burned photographs or the punishment cupboard. Those were evidences of what had been done to Sirius. This was evidence of his interior life, his emotional survival, his secret sources of hope. A letter, she said finally, from Andromeda Tonks, before she was Tonks, when she was still Andromeda Black. Ginny crossed the room quickly, read over Hermione's shoulder. When she finished, her eyes were bright with tears. That's beautiful, and so sad. Yes. Hermione refolded the letter carefully, exactly as she'd found it. It's also incredibly personal. Sirius kept this hidden for 25 years. He clearly valued it. And I don't think he meant for anyone else to read it. But we already have read it, Ginny pointed out. I know. Hermione stared at the letter in her hands, which means I need to decide what to do now. The ethical dimensions were complex, layered. On one hand, the letter was a beautiful expression of family support, evidence that Sirius hadn't been entirely alone, that someone had understood and tried to help. Andromeda Tonks was alive, part of the Order, raising her daughter, Nymphadora. She might cherish knowing that Sirius had kept this letter, that her words had mattered to him. On the other hand, Sirius had hidden it, had chosen not to share it, not to tell Andromeda he'd read it, not to bring it up in the decades since. That choice meant something. Perhaps he was protecting her from knowledge of his continued suffering. Perhaps he was embarrassed by his own vulnerability. Perhaps he simply wanted to keep this one thing private, unexamined, solely his own. Sharing it with Andromeda would violate that privacy. But keeping it secret felt like withholding something precious from someone who deserved to know. "What are you thinking?" Ginny asked. "I'm thinking that there's no good answer." Hermione set the letter down on the desk, smoothed out the creases. "If I tell Mrs. Tonks about this, I'm sharing something Sirius clearly wanted kept private. But if I don't tell her, I'm keeping information from her that might bring her comfort, might help her understand her relationship with her cousin better. What would Sirius want you to do?" "I don't know." Hermione thought of what little she knew about Sirius Black. His fierce loyalty, his recklessness, his tendency toward grand gestures and dramatic choices. "He's complicated. He kept this letter for decades, which suggests it mattered deeply to him. But he never showed it to anyone, never mentioned it. That suggests, what? Shame? Self-protection? Privacy?" "Maybe he was waiting for the right time," Ginny suggested. "Maybe he planned to share it eventually, but never found the chance. Or maybe he wanted it to stay hidden forever." Hermione picked up the letter again, held it to the light. The parchment was expensive. Andromeda had used her family's finest stationery for her goodbye. Privacy isn't just about protecting embarrassing secrets. Sometimes it's about controlling your own narrative, deciding what parts of yourself you share and what parts you keep sacred. She thought of her own private writings, the journal she kept hidden under her mattress at Hogwarts. She'd written about Ron there, about her confusion and frustration and tentative hope. If someone read those entries without permission, even with good intentions, even to help her, she'd feel violated, exposed, robbed of the right to decide when and how to reveal herself. Wasn't this the same thing? "You could make a copy," Ginny said thoughtfully. "Keep the original here, exactly where you found it, but preserve the text somehow, in case something happens, in case Sirius needs it later or wants to share it himself." Hermione considered. A copy would be safer than the original, less likely to be damaged or lost, and keeping the original in place honored Sirius's choice to hide it. But it still involved duplicating something private without permission. Though hadn't they already crossed that line days ago when they'd started documenting his childhood belongings? The memory of Molly's earlier words returned. "This is a violation, whether we admit it or not." Perhaps it was. Perhaps everything they were doing here constituted one long violation of Sirius's privacy, justified only by their belief that understanding mattered more than consent. That bearing witness to his trauma was worth the ethical cost. But where did that justification end? At what point did bearing witness become simple intrusion? Hermione looked at Ginny. "What would you want? If this were your letter, hidden for decades, what would you want someone to do if they found it?" Ginny thought for a long moment. "I'd want them to respect that I hid it for a reason. But I'd also want them to make sure it didn't disappear forever. That if something happened to me, someone would know it existed, would know that Andromeda tried to help, that I wasn't entirely alone. She met Hermione's gaze. I guess I'd want both things, privacy and preservation, even though they contradict each other. Yes. Hermione felt the weight of the letter in her hands. That's exactly the problem. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced someone's approach. Hermione quickly tucked the letter back into its hiding place in the hollowed book, slid the volume onto the shelf. By the time Remus Lupin entered the room, she and Ginny were sorting through a stack of old-school notices, apparently absorbed in mundane work. How's the progress? Lupin asked. Slow, Hermione said, which was true. We keep finding complications. Lupin's expression suggested he understood exactly what sort of complications she meant. Anything that needs documenting. This was the moment. Hermione could tell him about the letter, could ask his advice, defer the decision to someone older and presumably wiser. Lupin had known Sirius longer than anyone. If anyone had the right to decide what to do with the letter, surely it was him. But telling Lupin meant removing the decision from her own hands, meant spreading the secret further, involving more people in the violation. The more people who knew, the harder it would be to contain, the more likely that someone would eventually tell Andromeda or Sirius himself, and the whole careful preservation of privacy would collapse. Nothing urgent, Hermione heard herself say. Just more of the same. Evidence of an unhappy childhood. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Lupin studied her for a moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he knew she was withholding something. But he simply nodded. Molly wants us all downstairs for lunch. Take a break. You've been up here for hours. After he left, Ginny turned to Hermione. You didn't tell him? No. Hermione looked at the bookshelf, at the innocent-looking volume that contained such precious cargo. I need to think about this more carefully. Make a real decision, not just react. What's there to think about? Ginny asked, genuinely curious. Either we tell people or we don't. It's not that simple. Hermione sat on the edge of the dusty bed. If I tell Professor Lupin, I'm trusting him to make the right choice. But what if his idea of right is different from mine? What if he thinks Andromeda deserves to know, or that Sirius would want it shared? Then I've taken away my own ability to protect Sirius's privacy. But you're not Sirius, Ginny pointed out. You don't actually know what he'd want. You're guessing. Exactly. I'm guessing, which means any choice I make could be wrong. Hermione rubbed her temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. This is why consent matters. Why people have the right to make decisions about their own information. Because without asking them directly, we're just imposing our values onto their private lives and hoping we guess correctly. But you can't ask Sirius, Ginny said. He's not here, and by the time he is here, if he comes back, it might be too late for the information to matter. Too late for what? Hermione challenged. Too late to comfort Andromeda. She's lived for decades without knowing her letter mattered. A few more months won't change that. Too late to help Harry understand Sirius better. Harry survived this long without detailed knowledge of his godfather's childhood trauma. These things aren't urgent. They're just sad. And making someone else's sadness public without permission isn't help. It's exposure. Ginny was quiet for a moment. Then, you've already decided, haven't you? You're not going to tell anyone. I've decided not to decide yet, Hermione corrected. I'm going to think about it, research it even. There must be ethical frameworks for this sort of thing, guidelines for handling private documents found in unusual circumstances. I'll look into it properly before doing anything. And in the meantime, the letter stays exactly where Sirius left it, hidden, safe, private. Hermione stood, brushed dust from her jeans. If I'm going to violate someone's privacy, I want to do it deliberately, with full knowledge of what I'm doing and why. Not accidentally, because I acted too quickly. They went downstairs for lunch, where Molly had laid out sandwiches and soup. The twins were there, arguing cheerfully about some potential product invention. Ron was describing a particularly vicious doxy he'd encountered on the 3rd floor. The conversation was ordinary, comfortable, a brief respite from the emotional weight of their work. But Hermione couldn't fully engage. Her mind kept returning to the letter, to Andromeda's elegant handwriting, to the worn creases that proved Sirius had read it again and again. Stay strong, little cousin. Had those words helped? Had they sustained him through years at Hogwarts, through the war, through betrayal and Azkaban? Or had they simply reminded him of what he'd lost? The family member who'd tried to understand, who'd offered escape, but couldn't actually save him from the consequences of his own choices. After lunch, Hermione sought out Lupin in the library, where he was cataloguing potentially dangerous books for removal or containment. "Professor, can I ask you something?" "Of course." He set down a volume with a suspicious lock on the cover. "Though you don't need to call me Professor anymore. We're colleagues now, in a sense." "Remus, then." The name felt strange in her mouth, too informal, but she pushed through. "If you found something private, something that might help someone you cared about, but that was clearly meant to be kept secret, what would you do?" Lupin's expression turned thoughtful. "That's rather abstract. Could you be more specific?" "I'd rather not." Hermione met his gaze. "I'm trying to think through a principle, not just a specific situation. The principle being, do we have the right to share other people's private information without their consent, even when we think it would help them?" "Ah." Lupin set the book aside entirely, gave her his full attention. "That's the central question of what we're doing here, isn't it? We're excavating Sirius's private history without his permission, justifying it by saying we're trying to help or understand. But help can be a convenient excuse for intrusion." "Exactly." Hermione felt relief that he understood. "So where's the line? How do we know when we're genuinely helping versus when we're just satisfying our own curiosity or need to fix things?" "I don't think there is a clear line," Lupin admitted. "I think there are only difficult choices with uncertain outcomes. You gather what information you can, you consider the people involved, you make your best judgment, and then you live with the consequences." He paused. "But I will say this. In my experience, the choices we regret most aren't the times we stayed silent when we should have spoken. They're the times we spoke when silence would have been kinder." "So, you're saying keep secrets?" "I'm saying that privacy is a gift we can give people, even when they're not present to request it. Especially then." He smiled slightly. "Hermione, you're one of the most ethical people I know. If you're uncertain about whether to share something, that uncertainty is probably wisdom, not weakness. Trust your instincts." Hermione left the conversation more confused than she'd entered it. Trust her instincts. But her instincts were contradictory. Part of her wanted to preserve Sirius's privacy absolutely. Part of her wanted to share Andromeda's beautiful letter so that someone else could appreciate its tenderness. Part of her wanted to make copies of everything, creating a permanent archive of this lost history. Part of her wanted to burn it all and pretend they'd never looked. She returned to Sirius's childhood bedroom in the late afternoon. The light was failing, throwing long shadows across the dusty floor. The bookshelf stood innocent and unremarkable, no sign that it contained anything more significant than old textbooks. Hermione pulled out the hollowed Advanced Transfiguration Theory, extracted the letter once more. She sat on the floor, read it again by wandlight, memorizing phrases. You are not alone in feeling wrong here. Love matters, more than blood. You're welcome in our home, always. Then she took out a fresh piece of parchment and her self-inking quill. She copied the letter exactly, same words, same line breaks, even approximating Andromeda's elegant script as best she could. It took nearly an hour. When she finished, she had 2 letters, the original and her copy, nearly indistinguishable in the dim light. She stared at both for a long moment. Then, deliberately, she took her wand and whispered, "Incendio." The copy caught fire immediately, burning bright and fast. Within seconds, it was ash. Hermione returned the original to its hiding place, slid the book back onto the shelf, and stood. Her hands were trembling slightly. She'd made her choice. The letter would stay hidden, exactly as Sirius had left it. She wouldn't tell Andromeda, wouldn't tell Lupin, wouldn't create copies or documentation. Some things, she decided, deserved to remain private, even from well-intentioned witnesses, even from history. But she'd remember. She'd carry the knowledge of what Andromeda had written, what Sirius had kept, what love had looked like between 2 black family members who'd chosen kindness over cruelty. That would have to be enough. Downstairs, she heard Molly calling everyone for dinner. The house was settling into evening, its shadows deepening. Somewhere, Creature watched and waited. Somewhere, Sirius existed in hiding, unaware that people were excavating his past, making choices about his privacy, trying to help in ways he'd never asked for and might not want. Hermione closed the bedroom door behind her, leaving the letter to its decades-long solitude. Some gifts, she thought, were given by letting things remain undiscovered, even when discovery ached like loss. The argument began, as many arguments do, with a small disagreement over something practical. Molly Weasley stood in the entrance hall of Grimmauld Place, looking at the covered portrait of Walburga Black with undisguised frustration. "We need to remove this," she said. "It's a security risk. Every time someone comes through that door carelessly, she starts shrieking about blood traitors and mudbloods. The entire street can probably hear her." "The portrait has a permanent sticking charm," Remus Lupin reminded her from where he sat on the bottom step. "We've tried everything short of bringing down the wall itself. It's not coming off." "Then we bring down the wall." Molly's tone brooked no argument. "Arthur can help. We rebuild without the portrait. Problem solved." "That's not solving the problem. That's destroying part of the house's structure to avoid dealing with an unpleasant reminder." Remus stood, moved closer. "Molly, this portrait is part of what happened here, part of Sirius's history. We can't simply erase it because it's uncomfortable." "I'm not trying to erase history," Molly shot back. "I'm trying to make this house functional for order meetings. There's a difference between preserving the past and being held hostage by it. Is there? Remus challenged. Because it seems to me we've spent the past 4 days trying to do exactly that. Preserve the past, document it, understand it. And now, when faced with perhaps the most visceral reminder of what Sirius endured, you want to destroy it. That portrait screams obscenities at anyone with Muggle heritage or progressive values, Molly said, her voice rising. It's not a memorial. It's an active weapon. And I won't have it traumatizing people who come here in good faith to fight Voldemort. So cover it more securely. Silence it better. But don't destroy it. Why not? Molly's hands were on her hips now, her face flushed. Tell me, Remus, what possible value does that horrible woman's portrait have? What are we learning from it, except that Sirius's mother was a bigoted, cruel harpy who made her son's life miserable? We're learning that, Remus said quietly. We're bearing witness to what he survived, to what shaped him. Oh, for heaven's sake. Molly turned away, then spun back. This isn't about bearing witness anymore, is it? This whole exercise, letting Hermione document every painful object, spending hours discussing what each broken toy means, treating this house like an archaeological site instead of a headquarters. It's become something else, something obsessive. We're trying to understand. No. Molly's voice was sharp. You're trying to keep Sirius alive by cataloguing his trauma. You're romanticizing his pain because you feel guilty that you couldn't protect him from it. The words landed like a slap. Remus went very still. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. That's not fair, isn't it? Molly pressed forward. You were his friend, Remus. You knew what this house was like. You knew what his family did to him, and you did nothing. I was a child. You were his friend, Molly repeated, and friends protect each other. But you didn't. None of you did. You let James take him in, let him run away to the Potters, but you never confronted what had actually happened here. You never helped him heal from it. You just moved on, pretended it was in the past. Because Sirius wanted to move on, Remus said, his voice strained. He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want sympathy or analysis. He wanted to be treated like a normal person who'd made his own choices, not a victim who needed rescuing. And now? Molly gestured around at the house, at the evidence of their week's work. Now that he's not here to object, you're giving him all the sympathy and analysis he never wanted. You're excavating his pain without his permission because it makes you feel better, because it lets you pretend you're helping now, even though you failed to help then. That's not. Remus stopped, took a breath. That's not entirely wrong. The admission seemed to surprise Molly. She blinked, some of the anger draining from her posture. I do feel guilty, Remus continued quietly. We all failed him, in different ways. James by dying, Peter by betraying him, me by not believing in him strongly enough when he was arrested, and yes, perhaps by not confronting what his childhood had done to him when we were young, by letting him bury it instead of helping him process it. He sat back down on the steps, suddenly looking exhausted. But that doesn't mean this work is worthless, Molly. Understanding someone's past isn't the same as romanticizing their trauma. It is when you start treating trauma like treasure, Molly said, but her voice had softened. When you document every painful thing as though its pain is what makes it valuable. That's not respect, Remus. That's, I don't know what it is, but it's not healthy. Then what would you have us do? Remus looked up at her. Pack everything away. Pretend we never looked. Act as though we don't know what we know now. I'd have us finish the practical work we came here to do, Molly said. Make this house safe and functional. And yes, put the painful things away where they can't hurt anyone anymore. Where Sirius can decide when he's ready whether he wants to revisit them. By putting them away, you mean burying them. I mean protecting him. Molly's voice rose again. From well-meaning people who think they know what's best for him. From their need to understand and analyze and bear witness. Sometimes, Remus, the kindest thing we can do is leave people's pain alone. And sometimes, Remus countered, the cruelest thing we can do is pretend it never happened. They stared at each other across the entrance hall. Two people who cared deeply about the same man, who wanted to help him, but who had fundamentally different ideas about what help looked like. You think I'm being callous, Molly said finally. You think I don't care about what Sirius went through. No, Remus shook his head. I think you care very much. I think you're trying to protect him the way you protect your own children, by shielding them from pain, by creating safe spaces, by moving forward instead of dwelling in difficulty. That's not callousness. It's love. But you think I'm wrong. I think we're both wrong, Remus admitted. And both right. You're right that we've crossed lines we probably shouldn't have crossed, that we've intruded on Sirius's privacy in ways he might not forgive. But I'm right that some of what we've learned matters, that understanding his past might help us support him better in the present. Or it might just make us pity him, Molly said. And pity isn't respect, Remus. It's not friendship. Sirius doesn't need people looking at him with sad eyes, thinking about his terrible childhood every time he makes a joke or acts recklessly. He needs people to see him as he is now, not as the damaged product of abuse. But he is the product of his experiences, Remus said. We all are. Understanding that doesn't mean reducing him to his trauma. It means seeing the full picture. Does it? Molly moved to sit beside him on the steps. Or does it mean we can never look at him the same way again? That every time he's difficult or reckless or pushes boundaries, we'll think, oh, that's because of what his family did to him. We'll excuse behaviors we shouldn't excuse. We'll treat him like he's fragile when he's actually remarkably strong. Remus considered this. You're worried we'll infantilize him. I'm worried we'll steal his agency, Molly corrected. His right to be judged by his choices, not his circumstances. His right to move forward without people constantly pulling him back into his past. They sat in silence for a moment. Above them, the covered portrait of Walburga Black seemed to loom, even hidden. I don't know what the right answer is, Remus said finally. I thought I did when we started. I thought understanding would be enough, that if we just knew what had happened, we could help him heal from it. But now I'm not sure healing works that way. Maybe you can't heal someone else's wounds at all. Maybe all you can do is stand beside them while they heal themselves. Or choose not to heal, Molly added quietly. That's their right too, to carry their scars, to decide those scars are part of who they are. Yes, Remus looked at his hands, scarred from decades of transformations. Some scars we choose to keep. Molly studied him. You're thinking about your own situation. The lycanthropy. I'm thinking about how many people have tried to fix me over the years, Remus said. Cure me, heal me, help me accept myself. Most of them meant well. But what they were really trying to do was make themselves more comfortable with my existence. They wanted me to be at peace with being a werewolf, so they wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable about the injustice of it. And you're worried we're doing the same thing to Sirius? I'm worried. We're excavating his pain to make ourselves feel better about having witnessed it, Remus admitted. That we're turning his suffering into a project we can complete, a problem we can solve, when really, his pain is his own. And maybe our role isn't to understand it, or document it, or try to heal it. Maybe our role is just to be available, if and when he asks. Molly nodded slowly. I can accept that. Which means we should stop, Remus said. Stop the documentation, stop the excavation, pack away what we've found and leave the rest undiscovered. Should we? Molly asked. Or is that just another form of avoidance? We've already opened these doors, Remus. We've already learned what we've learned. Stopping now doesn't undo that. It just means we stop learning more. So what do you suggest? Molly thought for a long moment. I suggest we finish what we started, but consciously, deliberately, not with the goal of creating a complete archive of Sirius's suffering, but with the goal of making sure nothing dangerous or cursed remains hidden in this house. We're practical about it. We don't dwell. We don't romanticize. We just make the house safe. And if we happen to learn things along the way, we keep them to ourselves. We don't share them. We don't discuss them. We carry them quietly. As a burden, Remus said. As a responsibility, Molly corrected. This is what it means to care about someone who's been hurt. Sometimes you carry knowledge you'd rather not have, knowledge they didn't ask you to carry. But you carry it anyway, because love isn't always comfortable or simple. Remus smiled slightly. When did you become so wise? I've raised 7 children, Molly said dryly. You learn things. Mostly that people are complicated and help is harder than it looks. And sometimes the best thing you can do is make a decent meal and keep your opinions to yourself. I'm not sure I'm capable of keeping my opinions to myself. Then practice. Molly stood, offered him her hand. Come on, let's finish the work. Properly this time. Together. Remus took her hand, let her pull him to his feet. No more excavation. No more excavation, Molly agreed. Just cleaning, just making this place livable. If Sirius wants to explore his own history when he returns, he can. But we're done making choices for him. They stood together in the entrance hall, looking at the covered portrait, at the shadows that seemed to cling to every corner. The house had revealed much over the past 4 days. Too much, perhaps. But some revelations couldn't be undone. Do you think he'll forgive us? Remus asked quietly. For looking without asking? I don't know, Molly said honestly. But I think if we stop now, if we respect what privacy he has left, we'll have a better chance. Upstairs, they heard footsteps. Hermione and Ginny, probably, still working, still documenting. Remus should go up, tell them the new plan, tell them to stop. But first, he and Molly stood together in the dim hallway, 2 people who'd argued themselves into understanding, preparing to carry forward the difficult knowledge they'd gained. The house settled around them with its familiar creaks and whispers. Some arguments, Remus thought, weren't won or lost. They were simply survived. The discovery came on their final morning at Grimmauld Place. Remus Lupin had spent the night at the house, unwilling to leave it unguarded with so much order business now stored within its walls. He'd slept poorly. The mattress in the guest room was lumpy, and the house made sounds that kept him startled awake. Creaks that might have been footsteps, whispers that might have been wind. Once he could have sworn he heard a child crying, but when he investigated, he found nothing. Dawn came grey and reluctant through the grimy windows. Remus made tea in the kitchen, noting absently that Creature had been there before him. The counters were spotless, arranged with obsessive precision. The house elf was nowhere to be seen, but his presence lingered like a reproach. Molly arrived first, letting herself in with the key Dumbledore had provided. She looked tired, but determined. "Last day," she said, accepting the tea Remus offered. "We should be able to finish the remaining bedrooms and perhaps start on the attic if there's time." "Agreed." Remus sipped his own tea. "Though I think we should leave the attic for another visit. There's still the question of Creature." As if summoned by his name, the house elf appeared in the doorway. But something was different. Creature's usual hostility seemed muted, replaced by an agitation that bordered on panic. His ears twitched violently, and his gnarled hands clutched at his tea towel. "Master Sirius's room," he muttered. "They've been in Master Sirius's room, touching, prying, disturbing what ought to stay closed." "We've been careful, Creature," Molly said firmly. "We're cleaning, as ordered." "Not cleaning," Creature hissed. "Looking, searching, getting closer, too close, to what must stay hidden." "Mistress," Mistress commanded. "Keep the secret room sealed, Creature. Never let anyone enter. Never let the shame be exposed." Remus set down his tea very carefully. "What room, Creature?" The house elf's eyes went wide with horror at his own words. He clapped his hands over his mouth, then began striking himself on the head. "Bad Creature. Bad. Telling secrets, breaking commands. Bad. Stop that." Remus moved forward, but Creature disappeared with a crack before he could intervene. Molly and Remus exchanged glances. "A sealed room," Molly said slowly. "Something Walburga Black wanted hidden. Something she called shame," Remus added, "which could mean anything in that family. A Muggle artifact, evidence of kindness. Or something of Sirius's," Molly finished. Something he wanted protected. They found Hermione and Ginny already at work in Sirius's childhood bedroom. Hermione looked up as they entered, immediately noting their expressions. "What's wrong?" Creature let slip that there's a sealed room, Remus explained. Something Walburga Black commanded him to keep hidden. He was agitated, more than usual, almost frightened. "A sealed room where?" Hermione stood, her researcher's instincts clearly activated. He didn't say, but given that he mentioned being in Sirius's room, I'd guess somewhere in this area. Remus began examining the walls, running his hands along the paneling. "Look for irregularities, places where the architecture doesn't quite match. Hidden doors often reveal themselves through inconsistencies." They searched methodically. Hermione used detection charms. Ginny tapped along the walls, listening for hollow sounds. Molly checked the dimensions of the room against the floor plan they'd sketched earlier in the week. Remus simply observed, letting his instincts guide him. It was Hermione who found it. "Here," she said, pointing to a section of wall beside the bookshelf. "This panel is newer than the others. See how the wood grain doesn't quite match? And there's a concentration of magic here. Very old, very deliberate. Remus moved closer, extended his magical senses. She was right. Beneath the panel, he could feel something like a ward, not aggressive or defensive, but simply closed, locked from the inside. "Can you open it?" Molly asked. "Possibly." Hermione pulled out her wand, began running through unlocking charms. Alohomora, Portaberto, System Imperio. Nothing. The ward held firm, unresponsive to standard magic. "It's blood-locked," Remus said, recognizing the particular quality of resistance. "It requires black family blood to open. Sirius sealed it himself." "Then we can't get in," Ginny said. "We shouldn't get in," Molly corrected. "If Sirius locked this deliberately, he had reasons. Good reasons, probably. Or he locked it because his family commanded him to," Hermione argued. "Creature said Walburga wanted it sealed. Maybe Sirius was forced to comply. Or maybe he wanted it sealed for his own reasons," Remus said quietly. "Maybe there's something in there he didn't want anyone to see, including us. Especially us." They stood in silence, staring at the innocent-looking panel. Behind it, what? More evidence of abuse? Contraband? A childhood sanctuary? Something shameful that the Black family wanted hidden? Or something precious that Sirius wanted protected? "We're standing at a threshold," Remus said. "Once we cross it, we can't uncross it. Whatever's behind that panel has been sealed for, 25 years? 30? Sirius was probably 17 when he left this house for the last time. If he locked this room before leaving, it was a deliberate choice. A choice made by a traumatized teenager," Hermione pointed out. "Not by the adult he is now. Maybe adult Sirius would want us to open it. Maybe there's something important inside. Or maybe he locked it for reasons that are still valid," Molly countered. "Maybe some things should stay locked." "How convenient," Hermione said, her voice sharp, "that the things you want to leave alone are always the things that might be most revealing. First, you wanted to stop documenting. Then you wanted to stop investigating. Now, you want to leave a deliberately sealed room unexplored. At what point does caution become willful ignorance? At the point where we're violating someone's explicit choice," Molly shot back. "Sirius sealed this room, blood-locked it. That's not ambiguous. That's a clear message. Stay out." A message from a 17-year-old boy who was probably terrified and confused, Hermione insisted. "We're not children, Mrs. Weasley. We can handle whatever's in there, and we might need to know what it is." "Need to know why?" Molly challenged. "What possible reason requires us to break into someone's deliberately locked sanctuary?" "Because he's in hiding," Hermione said, her voice rising. "Because he might not survive this war. Because if something happens to him, this room and whatever it contains might be lost forever. Because documentation matters, memory matters, truth matters. Privacy matters more," Molly said flatly. They turned to Remus, both clearly expecting him to arbitrate. He looked from Molly to Hermione, understanding both positions, agreeing with both, paralyzed by the weight of the choice. "Remus," Hermione pressed, "you said yourself that bearing witness was important. That understanding Sirius's past could help us support him. How can we understand if we leave the most deliberately protected part of his history sealed?" "You also said," Molly reminded him, "that we needed to stop treating his trauma like treasure, that we needed to respect what privacy he had left. This is privacy, explicitly claimed. if we break it, we're no better than his family was. Remus closed his eyes. He thought of Sirius at 17, brilliant and damaged, loyal and reckless, trying so desperately to become someone other than what his family had made him. What would that boy have, hidden in a blood-locked room? What would he have wanted protected? He thought of Sirius at 33, gaunt from Azkaban, haunted by betrayal, clinging to the few relationships he had left. What would that man want? Understanding? Privacy? The comfort of knowing his secrets remained his own? I don't know, Remus admitted. I genuinely don't know what's right here. Then we vote, Hermione suggested. 4 of us. Majority decides. This isn't a democracy, Molly objected. This is someone's private life. Which is why we need multiple perspectives, Hermione countered, so no one person bears the full responsibility of the choice. Remus understood what she was doing, distributing the guilt, making the violation collective instead of individual. It was clever. It was also somewhat cowardly. But perhaps cowardice was appropriate here. Perhaps they were all too compromised to make this choice alone. All right, he said. We vote. But first, I want everyone to articulate what they're really voting for. Not just open or don't open, but what principle we're upholding. Hermione went first. I vote to open. I'm voting for knowledge, for the principle that history, even painful history, deserves to be preserved, for the possibility that understanding someone completely is more important than protecting their privacy. I'm voting for truth. Ginny spoke next, surprising them all. I vote not to open. I'm voting for Sirius's right to keep secrets, for the principle that some things should stay private, even from people who love you, maybe especially from them. I'm voting for dignity. Molly nodded approvingly. I vote not to open. I'm voting for consent, for the principle that people deserve control over their own narratives, their own disclosures, for respect. That left Remus 3 votes, 1 to open, 2 to leave sealed. His vote would decide. He thought of all the times people had invaded his privacy, all the times people had accidentally discovered his lycanthropy and then treated him differently. All the times well-meaning individuals had tried to help him accept his condition, process his trauma, heal his wounds, when what he'd really needed was for them to respect his boundaries and let him manage his own pain. He thought of Sirius, who'd survived so much violation already, whose childhood had been one long experience of having his choices overridden, his preferences ignored, his autonomy denied. But he also thought of the letters they'd found, the dragon James had given him, the evidence of Andromeda's care, all the small proofs that Sirius had been loved, had been worth loving, even when his family tried to convince him otherwise. Those proofs mattered. They told a story that counterbalanced the cruelty. What if the locked room contained more such proof? What if there was something inside that would help Harry understand his godfather, help Sirius himself remember he'd been more than just a victim? Or what if it contained only shame and pain, the very things Sirius had wanted to leave sealed forever? I vote to open, Remus said quietly. Silence. But, he continued, I vote to open with conditions. We seal the room again immediately after. We document nothing. We tell no one what we find, not Dumbledore, not Harry, not even Sirius, unless he asks directly. What we learn stays between the 4 of us, and if what's inside is too private, too painful, we forget it. We actively choose not to remember. You can't unknow something, Molly objected. No, Remus agreed. But you can choose not to let it change how you see someone. You can wall it off in your mind, treat it as sacred information that doesn't inform your behavior. I've done it before. We all have. Hermione nodded slowly. Like keeping someone's medical information confidential. You know it, but you don't act on it. Exactly. Molly looked deeply unhappy, but she nodded. If we're doing this, we do it now, before we lose our nerve or I regain my common sense. Remus approached the panel, placed his wand against it. This requires black blood, which none of us have. But we have black magic, Hermione said. She rummaged in her bag, pulled out one of the cursed objects they'd confiscated earlier in the week, a dark ring that had belonged to someone in Sirius's family tree. This belonged to Phineas Black. If I use it as a focus, that's dark magic, Molly warned. We're breaking into a sealed room, Hermione pointed out. We're already crossing lines. She held the ring against the panel, channeled magic through it. The ward resisted, then, slowly, reluctantly, began to unravel. The panel shimmered, turned translucent, then vanished entirely. Behind it was a door, small, child height, painted a faded blue that seemed jarringly cheerful against the house's general gloom. Someone, Sirius, presumably, had carved words into the wood. Private. Keep out. This means you. Hermione reached for the handle. Wait, Remus said. One more thing. Before we open this, I want everyone to promise. If we regret what we find, we reseal it immediately. We don't push through just because we've come this far. We retain the right to turn back. Agreed? Agreed, they murmured. Hermione turned the handle. The door opened. The room was smaller than a cupboard, barely larger than the punishment space they'd found days earlier, but entirely different in character. Where that had been bare and cruel, this was filled. Remus had to duck to enter. Inside, the ceiling was perhaps 5 feet high, comfortable for a child, cramped for adults. The walls had been painted over the dark wood paneling, covered in a child's hand, with stars and constellation patterns. Not the Black family constellations, not Sirius or Regulus, or any of the names that adorned the family tree. These were Muggle constellations, Orion the Hunter, Ursa Major, Cassiopeia. Someone had labeled them carefully in neat script. A small mattress lay on the floor, covered with a faded blanket. Beside it sat a wooden crate serving as a table, holding a stub of candle and a stack of books. Remus recognized some of the titles: adventure stories, books about explorers, a battered copy of Treasure Island, and on the floor, weighted down with a smooth river stone, was a letter. No, not a letter. An envelope, addressed in a child's handwriting, to future Sirius, age 17. Hermione knelt beside it, but didn't touch. They all stared at the envelope as though it might explode. He wrote to himself, Ginny whispered. Before leaving for Hogwarts, Remus said, recognizing the script. This is 11-year-old Sirius's handwriting. I saw it on James's letters. He kept some of the earliest ones. This was written just before he started at Hogwarts. Should we read it? Hermione asked, though her hand was already reaching for the envelope. No, Molly said firmly. This is the most private thing we've found. A child's letter to his future self. We absolutely should not. But Hermione had already picked it up. The envelope was sealed with wax, a crude seal probably made with the candle beside it. She looked at Remus, asking permission with her eyes. He should say no, should stop this, should honor the clear boundaries Sirius had established. A blood-locked room containing a letter meant only for himself. Instead, he nodded. Hermione broke the seal. The wax crumbled easily, aged and brittle. She unfolded the parchment, and they crowded close to read. Dear future Sirius, age 17. I'm writing this the night before I leave for Hogwarts. I'm 11. I know I'll probably never read this because I'll forget I hid it here, or because I'll be too embarrassed by how young I sound. But I wanted to write it anyway, just in case. I'm scared. Everyone says Hogwarts will be brilliant. Andromeda said so in her letter, the one I'm not supposed to have. James Potter, he's my age. We met at the robe shop. He says it's the best place in the world. That houses don't matter except for Quidditch, and that no one cares if you're from a dark family as long as you're not a git. But what if I am a git? What if I'm more like them than I want to be? What if the sorting hat puts me in Slytherin and I become just like mother and father? What if I can't escape what I am? I've been thinking about this a lot, about whether blood determines who you are, like they say. Mother says our blood is sacred, that it makes us superior. But if that's true, why does being superior feel so much like being trapped? I'm hiding this letter in my secret room, the only place in the house that's truly mine. I made it myself when I was 7, used magic I wasn't supposed to know yet, stole paint from the basement, worked on it for weeks whenever they locked me in my bedroom for punishment. It's not much, but it's mine. The stars on the walls are from a Muggle book I found. Regulus would tell on me if he knew I had it. But he won't find this place. No one will. I sealed it with blood magic, so only I can open it. So, future Sirius, you're 17 now. You're about to leave this house forever, probably. You've graduated Hogwarts, so I guess you know which house you ended up in. I hope it wasn't Slytherin. I hope you found friends who didn't care about blood purity. I hope James Potter became your friend like he promised he would. I hope you're not like them. I hope you proved that blood doesn't determine everything, that you can choose. But if you did end up like them, if you're reading this and you're a Death Eater or a blood purist or someone who hurts people because of their blood status, then I want you to know something. 11-year-old you hated that. Hated everything this family stands for. Hated the cruelty and the pride and the obsession with purity. We wanted to be good. We wanted to be kind. We wanted to choose love instead of power. So if you forgot that, if you let them shape you into something dark, it's not too late. You can still choose differently. You can still be who you wanted to be. And if you did escape, if you became someone good, thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to leave. Thank you for proving that we're more than our blood. Don't come back here. Don't let them pull you back. Whatever you built at Hogwarts, whatever life you made for yourself, protect it. It's worth more than anything in this house. Burn this letter after you read it. Don't let anyone else see it. This is private, just between 11-year-old us and 17-year-old us. Good luck, be brave, be kind, be anything but what they tried to make you. Sirius, age 11. P.S. I painted the stars so I could practice escaping. Every night before sleep, I'd look at them and imagine flying away. So if you're reading this, I guess we made it. We escaped. Hermione's hands were shaking. She lowered the letter slowly, and Remus saw tears on her cheeks. None of them spoke. Remus, thought of 17-year-old Sirius, defiant, reckless, determined to prove he was nothing like his family. Had he read this letter? Had he come back to this hidden room before leaving Grimmauld Place for the final time? Or had he been too angry, too eager to escape, too focused on running toward the Potters to stop and look back? He never read it, Ginny said softly. Look, the seal was intact when we opened it. He sealed this room and never came back. Why? Hermione asked. Why lock it away forever? Because he was ashamed, Molly said quietly. Ashamed of the scared child he'd been, ashamed of needing a secret room, of having to paint stars for comfort, of being weak enough to write a letter, asking his future self for forgiveness. That's not weakness, Hermione protested. No, Molly agreed. But trauma doesn't always let us see ourselves clearly. Sirius probably thought this room represented everything he wanted to leave behind, so he sealed it, blood-locked it, made sure no one could ever see his vulnerability. Remus knelt beside the mattress, touched the faded blanket. How many nights had young Sirius hidden here? How many times had he traced those painted stars, dreaming of escape? And they'd found it. They'd broken into his sanctuary, read his most private thoughts, witnessed his childhood fear and hope. We need to seal this again, he said, immediately. But, Hermione started. No. Remus's voice was firm. This was wrong. Necessary, perhaps, but wrong. We violated something sacred. The least we can do is restore it. What about the letter? Ginny asked. Remus looked at it, the childish handwriting, the earnest plea for goodness, the desperate hope that future Sirius wouldn't become what his family wanted. Instructions to burn it, to keep it private. Instructions they'd already disobeyed. We put it back exactly as we found it, he said. We seal the room. We never speak of this again. To anyone. Ever. Shouldn't Sirius know? Hermione asked. Shouldn't someone tell him what 11-year-old him wanted? What he hoped for? Why? Molly challenged gently. So he can know that even his childhood self's private thoughts weren't safe from intrusion? So he can feel violated twice. Once by us reading this, and again by us telling him we read it. She's right, Remus said. The kindest thing, the only ethical thing, is to pretend this never happened. Hermione carefully refolded the letter, returned it to its envelope, placed it back on the floor exactly as they'd found it. The river stone went on top, holding it in place. They backed out of the room one by one. Remus took a final look at the painted stars, the small mattress, the humble sanctuary of a child trying to survive. I'm sorry, he whispered to the empty space. We shouldn't have looked. Then he closed the door, used the dark magic ring to reseal the ward, stronger this time, made it so that only Sirius's blood could ever open it again. The panel reappeared, hiding the cheerful blue door. Within moments, it looked like ordinary wall. They stood in Sirius's childhood bedroom, 4 people carrying knowledge they'd never asked for. We made a mistake, Molly said finally. We should have stopped days ago. Yes, Remus agreed. But we can choose what to do with it, Hermione said. We can choose not to let this change how we see him. We can wall it off, like Professor Lupin said. Keep it sacred. Can we? Ginny asked. Can you really unknow something like that? We have to try, Remus said. Because the alternative, treating Sirius differently because we know he was once a scared child, that would be another violation, another way of refusing him his dignity. They finished their work at Grimmauld Place in silence. packed the last boxes, cleaned the final rooms, prepared the house for order use. By evening, it was functional, safe, ready, but changed somehow, heavy with the weight of secrets discovered and sealed again. Before they left, Remus stood in the entrance hall one last time. The covered portrait of Walburga Black loomed in the shadows. The house creaked around him, holding its stories close. "We saw you," he said quietly to the empty air. "We saw what they did to you. We saw what you survived, and we'll never tell." It was a promise and a penance. Outside, night had fallen. The others waited on the steps, ready to leave this place behind. Remus locked the door to number 12, Grimmauld Place. The house disappeared behind its wards, hiding once more. Some secrets, he thought, were meant to stay hidden, even when discovery broke your heart, especially then.